Hi guys, I'm Kirsten. Welcome back to my channel. I wanted to get on today and just kind of tell you Tyler's story. Let me see if putting this down helps. Okay, now it's going. Okay, so I kind of wrote up this little thing to describe Tyler. I was thinking about him today, and I know I've said in other videos that I don't like to journal. I'd rather just talk to somebody, a counselor or my husband, or I get on YouTube and talk, but I just wanted to give you guys just a little bit of insight about Tyler and kind of maybe what led up to him taking his life, and maybe some of you can relate to him and what he experienced, and there might be some parents who are living with children who experience kind of some of the things that Tyler did as well. Hopefully my battery doesn't go dead. It's right in the middle of it all. I can just imagine that. Anyway, I wrote it, so I'm going to be kind of reading it. I'm not like a good speaker in front of a public audience, and so I would have a very difficult time getting up in front of public and talking if I didn't have something to read. But I don't have cue cards, but this is just kind of something I wrote up this morning. Tyler Michael Steen was born on December 4th, 1996. My pregnancy was pretty normal, but at 4 months gestation, Tyler was diagnosed as having cerebral cysts on his brain. I'm not sure whether or not that contributed a part into his constant up and down moods, but even as a child, he was emotional. It wasn't until high school when he really started to exhibit symptoms of bipolar disorder and even potential borderline personality disorder. I've done a lot of studies on both, and I work as a mental health nurse. That's kind of been my specialty, and I've seen both of these personalities, and I started noticing them in my son, like the onset of it in later in high school. Tyler could be the most fun person to be around, and then within minutes he would turn sour and you could see his teeth gritting over something that was said, or maybe just some negative thought that was going through his head. He had difficulty with patience. Bad traffic or asking him to do something that he didn't want to do about sent him over the edge at times. Tyler suffered his entire life from the age of 5 with type 1 diabetes and epilepsy. So I asked him one time if he could ever remember not being diabetic, and he says no, that his whole life he just remembers having to give shots and not being able to eat certain foods, and having to watch his blood sugars. So it's just something he's always grown up with. And then at age 7 he developed epilepsy. So anytime he'd have a seizure, we weren't sure if it was related to diabetes and low blood sugar or if it was an epileptic seizure. I do know that with diabetes, depression is common. He would have multiple seizures a month when he was little, and then even into high school he would have them. I remember hearing loud crashes at night and jumping out of bed, but having such fear of what I would find. Mike and I would run downstairs to find our son convulsing on the floor for several minutes. Many times I wasn't sure if the seizures were from diabetes, low blood sugar, or epilepsy. So while he convulsed, I would check his blood sugar to see if I should give him glucagon or just let the seizure ride itself out. Many times, if we saw food or some sort of food coming out of his mouth, we knew he had awakened to a low blood sugar and was attempting to feed himself some sugar to bring up the extreme hypoglycemia. I wonder to this day if all of the seizures he had contributed to some part to the mental illness he faced in his later years. There was a time he even fell down the stairs. He was at the top of our stairs, and at the bottom landing we have slate, like granite, slate, rock, whatever. And I wasn't home, but his older sister and younger sister were, and they heard the crash, and I think he was in junior high, and he had a seizure at the top of the stairs and fell down and hit his head pretty hard. So, that's something he struggled with, and it broke my heart. I cried every single time he'd have a seizure. Through high school, Tyler became very uncompliant with his health and the care of his diabetes. Naturally, high school, teen boys. He told me to back off and stop trying to tell him when to take his insulin and his medication for seizures. Ultimately, I did it, and it was so painful for me to watch him eat sugar and go to eat fast food even though I had a healthy dinner prepared at home. He would not check his blood sugar or take insulin on many occasions, and I hated it. I hated it. It like tortured me. I knew as a nurse what would eventually happen if he continued to live his life this way. He was determined to deny that he had any health issues. He was then diagnosed later with celiac disease and asthma. My poor boy, he had so much to deal with in life as far as health went, and it broke my heart. And it just started from the beginning, from age 5. Like, I don't think he ever remembers not being healthy. He was a sensitive boy and truly loved people when he was healthy, meaning when his blood sugar was in check and things were going well in his life. He was talented. He taught himself how to play the drums. He played the drums for several worship teams at church and different worship teams, and just taught himself, and he just loved it, loved it, loved it. If you watched the video of the tribute I put up of him, you could see him playing the drums in just a little clip. He taught himself, and then he also taught himself to play the guitar. So he had a lot of talents, and people loved him and wanted him around. He'd be the sweetest kid, your young man, to anyone. He was polite and very sensitive and intuitive to hurting people. He definitely sensed when I was hurting and would hurt for me and do what he could and offer to take me out to eat or would buy me something that I liked. I miss that part of my son. He could tell when something was wrong with me, and he was always the first out of all my kids to ask, "Mom, are you okay?" He would bring me white cake. It's something I love. You know, he'd go to Albertsons and bring home a piece of white cake and throw it on my lap when he got home, you know, if he knew I was hurting or something. In high school, he had dated a girl who had some serious issues, mainly surrounding anxiety, which culminated into an eating disorder. They had an unhealthy connection. Tyler felt that he needed to fix her. She would text him her anxious thoughts and the problems she was having with food and eating. Tyler became anxious with her, and in high school he would sit with her and not eat his lunch because she didn't eat hers. I remember packing him lunches and he would not eat them. Even after he and his girlfriend broke up, he told me he was too embarrassed to eat in front of people. I don't know what that was all about, but he had piles of sack lunches rotting in the back seat of his car often, according to his sister Sydney, who rode to school with him. He became extremely anxious and hard to live with. His anxiety was palpable, and if you've been around anyone who's anxious, you could just feel it. Like the minute you walk into the room, you feel it, and that was with Tyler. For someone like me who feels emotions easily, his anxiety bled onto me, and then I felt sick and wanted to help him so that he felt better, and therefore I would feel better in return. That's a codependent nature. It's a very unhealthy nature because ultimately you're doing it to be selfish in a way. I mean, not always. Like I wanted him to feel better, but I also wanted me to feel better too. I didn't want to feel that pain. It was just a weird cycle, and it needed to be broken. So I know it was unhealthy, and it was a very codependent reaction. And I think he might have been codependent to me too as well. I don't know. I never wanted to say the wrong thing to Tyler for fear of him blowing up in anger and storming out the door. Sometimes I had to, and then I could feel his anger, which I hated that too. I just let him go. Just let him have his anger, his, you know, I mean, he wouldn't hit things or throw things or slam doors, but you could just tell he just, and leave, or, you know, go up to his room and isolate. He'd be up and then down and then angry, then on top of the world at any given time. One would not know what to expect with him. Of course, he was not compliant with his insulin or other medications, so I know that if he were to see a doctor for his depression and anxiety, he would not have accepted their help. About a week before he turned 18, he threatened and attempted suicide by overdosing on insulin. His girlfriend, once again, had broken up with him. She would break up with him at the drop of a hat, then ask him back, then drop him again. This played a big part in his anxiety. He didn't like rejection and would go right back to her, knowing full well that she would probably dump him again very soon. We ambushed him one night after he got home from work, Mike and I did, and we had his bag packed to go to a local psych hospital, the psych hospital where I worked as a nurse. He got home from work and we told him to get into the car. On the way, we let him know that because he threatened to take his life and was even telling friends at school as well as the school counselor that he wanted to end his life, we were taking him to the Intermountain Psych Hospital. He begged me not to do it. I remember him sitting in the back seat behind Mike, and it was dark outside and I was in the passenger seat, and I was telling him this. I was like looking at him, And he was begging me, Mom, please, please, please don't. I'm not suicidal. I don't want to go. Please, please, you know, just begging. And it was just like, oh, it crushed my heart because he was crying and begging me to not take him. I cried inside because I saw his pain. It was torment for me to have to do that. We got him checked into the hospital, but he said all of the right things, and they released him that night with nothing but a piece of paper saying that he was cleared to go home. I was so upset because he did have problems. He needed help, but because he was literally days away from turning 18, I knew my time as a mother to help him get medical assistance was limited. What could I do? There was nothing I could do. Of course, this angered him, and I felt his anger for the rest of that week. He isolated and wouldn't be in the same room as me. Finally, he got over it, and all was well with the world because he found a new girlfriend. When he had a girlfriend and all was going well, he was on top of the world. Nothing could stop him. He became very creative and inventive and would talk a mile a minute and would get overexcitable. We laugh as the family just how fast he talked. Like he'd just get on a roll talking about his stories of firefighting and saving lives and blah, 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 blah. You know, like he'd just be going nuts. And we were like, whoa, slow down, Ty. We can't understand what you're saying. I think we even talked about that at the funeral. It's just a good memory we have of him, how he just would get overexcited, especially when he was passionate about something. And he'd get really loud too. It was actually fun to have him around when he was like this. He would laugh and take his friends out and have a good old time. Me too. I mean, he'd take me out. When he had money, it was like, Mom, let's go do this and this and this and this. And, you know, he was on top of the world. This would last a while until he and whatever girlfriend he had at the time broke up with him. Then he was in the depths of despair again. Mike and I and Sydney were left to pick up the pieces and fill his sadness and frustration with life. 9 months after graduating high school, he got into a great fire program in a neighboring state. He was so excited to go and live his dream. When he was 7 years old, he got a Make-A-Wish trip because of the illnesses he had. His dream trip was to go to Ground Zero in New York City and visit the fire stations there and meet the heroes of 9/11. So finally, his dream of becoming a firefighter was coming true. He was awesome at his work, and he completed all of the required steps it took for him to obtain all of the certificates and accreditation he needed to become a fireman. He got A's in all of his fire classes and was promoted quickly. He eventually became quite the respected leader in his department. At his funeral, we heard several stories of him taking the lead fearlessly. He took over the volunteer program and had great goals for them and got them equipment and honor that they had been lacking in the years previous. Although he was horrible with his own finances and could easily blow $800 in a week, seriously, he was meticulous with the money he was charged with as he was the president of the volunteer program. We couldn't be more proud of our son. He was literally living his dream and loving it. He would call me regularly when he was happy and would tell me all of the stories of the lives he saved and the fires he fought. I was always so proud of him, and he and I would share medical stories since we both worked in the medical field. He was an EMT and I was a nurse. It was fun hearing his stories. I remember him even sharing stories of compassion about some of his patients and how he would hurt for them and was so compassionate and held them while waiting for a paramedic. He didn't care if their vomit or blood or sweat was dripping all over him. He just talked them through it to help calm them down until a more qualified medical personnel would arrive on the scene. What a proud parent I was. What a good man he was becoming. He valued me and what I thought of him. I remember a time when we went to visit him in Oregon and I was asking him about his job and what he did at the fire station. He would tell me all about every little detail in his usual excitable fashion. I smiled. I remember seeing the weight room in the department and just casually asking him, do you guys work out in there? Do you work out in this weight room? Like, you know, normal question. Evidently, Ty took that as meaning, he told Sydney, he took that as meaning Mom doesn't think I'm buff. Okay, I don't know, I'm one of those moms that doesn't look at my son and think, wow, he's buff, you know? I just don't do that. Like, I don't see my son, I didn't see my son in that light, but he was sensitive to it and really thought that my underlying meaning was that he wasn't buff. So that's just how Ty was. He loved it when I really liked his current girlfriends, which I liked them all, even though it seemed he had a new one every time we saw him. The girls would break up with him because they couldn't handle his personal insecurities when it came to relationships. He would be heartbroken if they didn't want to go out one night or if they had homework instead that they needed to do. He took it as a personal rejection and would become very angry or sad. I know this is a fact, as one of his girlfriends shared this with me right before she was ready to break up with him. Every breakup was intolerable for him. He would sink into the pits of despair until he landed another girlfriend. Then the world was right again. This was Tyler's relational life while he lived away from home. I hated to hear when a girl would leave him because I knew he would be in pain emotionally. I usually really liked the girls too. He picked some really great ones and beautiful ones too. Life seemed to be going well when he hooked up with his last girlfriend, whom he found on a dating website. She was beautiful and was in a sorority. He really did find quality girls. Many were born again Christians, which in the beginning was important to him. But later, I don't think that mattered much to him anymore. He just was so desperate for a relationship. He was climbing the success ladder at work, and although he had butted heads with a few of his coworkers, many respected him. I heard stories from his closest friends who worked with him, and he told me after Tyler died that for 8 months prior to his death, he spoke of wanting to end his life and was tired of the emotional turmoil inside. He would become angry at his coworkers because they were lazy or for some other reason. He would blow through money like no other and then be in debt until next payday. He was always battling his blood sugars and then was also having seizures and pulled off fires because of them. He couldn't control that. This same friend told us that the chaplain or the chief would talk with Tyler about why he wanted to end his life, and Tyler would tell them that he no longer felt that way. So we as parents never heard anything, and no true medical help was ever provided. Our last visit to Oregon and our last walk on the beach, Tyler and me, which I recorded in a vlog, which some of you probably have seen, we talked about his depression and his ups and downs and his disappointment with his relationships. He agreed that rather than loving the girl he was with, he was more addicted to relationships. This is when I started realizing that along with bipolar tendencies, he also had borderline personality tendencies. He hated rejection, and the only thing that made him happy was being in a happy relationship. I read countless books on living with someone with borderline, and Tyler fit the bill there. Our talk on the beach was a blessing. He really opened up to me and shared some pain he had. I encouraged him to see a doctor and counselor so that he could get some help. He actually agreed, and I even said we would pay for whatever it cost. I told him we would even pay for his medication too. He seemed to agree with that, and in my mind, I assumed he would seek help right away. After Tyler died, we heard that he had stopped taking his insulin right after that visit to Oregon, right after that walk on the beach. Was that him trying to end his life slowly? I will never know. His feet began to get sores on them and lose sensation. He told his buddy that roomed with him that he couldn't really feel his feet anymore and was worried it would be the end of his dream career. Again, the chaplain and the chief tried to intervene, but to no avail. Eventually, Tyler pushed through for 3 more months, working as hard and as well as he could, doing what he loved despite the pain or the numbness in his feet. My poor boy, what despair he must have felt. On January 8, 2018, 2 days after he had left our home for a 10-day visit, the one I talked about in a previous video, or maybe I'll post it after this one, I'm not sure. His roommate told me that Tyler was not acting like himself and that he was extremely angry and irrational. The staff kept telling him to check his blood sugar, but Tyler refused in anger. Eventually they got him to do it, and it turned out that his blood sugar was 850, which is so very high. How he could even somewhat function is beyond me. Why he wasn't already dead or in a coma is incomprehensible. He told his coworkers that he would take his insulin, but his roommate said he was pretty sure Tyler didn't take any. They went on a call that night at about 7 p.m. and Tyler worked his heart out as he always did on calls. He could definitely forget his heartache and his high blood sugar when he was on a call. After the call, Tyler's blood sugar was evidently still quite elevated, and he had a blow-up with his roommate over something quite mundane. Tyler then decided to get into his car and go drive, as he loved to do. This was a coping mechanism for him. He isolated and just drove for miles and miles. He evidently arrived back at the station by 10 p.m. that night, according to the roommate. Tyler's car had a loud muffler on it, so you could hear it a mile away. To this day, when I hear a loud car driving by, I just think of my boy, think of Tyler, and I start to tear up a little bit. He loved his loud car. His roommate texted Tyler and asked him if he was coming in. Tyler said yes, but later. An hour passed, and the roommate texted Ty again. Tyler responded with, "I'll be in a bit." By midnight, the roommate had heard a loud bang, or what he described as heavy boots dropping outside. He said he didn't know what it was, but it didn't sound good, and he just said he sunk deeper into his bed and went to sleep. By 4 in the morning, he woke up and still no Tyler. He tried texting Tyler, and no response. He went out to the rec room to find him, but no Tyler. He then went out out into the dark to Tyler's car and crept up to the passenger window and saw blood on Tyler's right hand and his head leaning way off to the left side. The roommate knew at that moment what had happened 4 hours earlier. This friend will forever be scarred and will need your prayers. I pray for him all the time. His name is, well, I won't even say his name because I don't want to mention it on YouTube. The coroner and police were called along with a locksmith as Tyler had locked himself in his car. It was over. Tyler was gone. 3 hours later, a knock at our door was heard. I yelled up to Sydney saying, "Who in the world is here at 7 in the morning?" It was just Sid and I at home. Mike was already at work and Isaac had just caught the bus. I noticed as I was walking closer to the door that the person at the door had on a shiny badge. I opened the door and read coroner on the badge. I knew someone I knew or loved had just died. I immediately assumed it was Mike, but when the coroner asked if I was Tyler Steen's mother, I knew what she was about to tell me. After she shared what she knew, which was only the fact that he had died, I knew in my heart of hearts what ultimately took his life. It was the gun that he was so excited to buy on his 21st birthday. He loved that gun, and I know that when he bought it, it wasn't his intention to use it for that purpose. It was just there when he needed it on January 8th. My time is running out on this camera, so I am going to make like a part 2 to finish this up. I didn't realize I wrote so much. But anyway, check out the next video, the part 2 of it, and I will talk about the rest of it. But this is just Tyler's story. This is just what happened and how we found out, and you know, kind of what could have led up to him deciding to end his life. Thank you guys so much for watching, and check out part 2 if you're interested.